Welcome to Stat Masters, where we teach you how to use Player Profiler to win at fantasy football and better evaluate players. My name is Aaron Stewart, and I'm a senior analyst for Player Profiler. My co-host is Chris Bonagura, a fantasy intelligence network analyst for Player Profiler. Chris, who are we talking about today?
I feel like it would only be appropriate to talk about Jonathan Taylor, considering he's the most newsworthy player of the last week. And also because it's just always good to track players and kind of reform your arguments as you go. I know you and I have both been pretty much out on Taylor at his early second round cost that he had. But now, I mean, you look on Underdog, in just the last week, he's fallen 3.4 spots. He's officially being drafted just behind Tony Pollard, and he starts to inch closer and closer to the value that I originally had him as, which to me is a buying window despite any uncertainty. Aaron, how are you feeling about this?
Oh, yeah, agreed. Buy Jonathan Taylor. When people are afraid of players, that's when you pounce. Like we dealt with this with Saquon Barkley, kind of similar. This prolific running back that everyone is fading because, there's going to be a holdout. Jonathan Taylor, he demanded a trade. Spoiler alert, he's not going to get traded. And even if he does, that doesn't change his situation. Running backs go from team to team, and they'll be just fine. Their job, for the most part, is pretty simple. And Taylor is definitely the most prolific running back we've seen in the NFL in his 3-year career. And even this past season, it was rough. He dealt with injuries, but still, we have maybe the best pure runner, if not the best pure runner. Like he's top 3.
Are you just going to steal Nick Chubb's title? Nick Chubb didn't retire.
Nick Chubb didn't retire, but Taylor is up there with him. And I think there's people that make the case for him. But Jonathan Taylor, this is the stat from 2021 that blew my mind, right? Like the efficiency metrics weren't there this past season. But in 2021, he led NFL running backs in juke rate and breakaway run rate. This past year, as I mentioned, he wasn't healthy. If he's slightly healthy, and he's already been on Twitter putting his own team on blast for putting him on the PUP or the NFI with a back injury, seems like he's pretty healthy. And did we not learn our lesson with Saquon Barkley just this past season that, hey, when the prolific running back is a year removed from injuries, that they can start to look like the fantasy dominant running back that they are? Yeah. And Taylor, if he's with the Colts, that offense goes through him no matter what. It might be coach speak, but like the new Colts head coach, when he came in, that's one of the first players he talked about. Like he knows, and Chris Ballard, the GM, knows. Ballard wants to get this guy paid. It's just ownership that doesn't. But like that's that whole thing. Like it's insane that in 1 week his ADP has dropped 3.5 spots because he's demanding a trade. This is just how the NFL goes. It's not a fantasy thing. There's no leverage for Jonathan Taylor. All he can do is say, I want to be traded. That should not have caused his ADP to drop, but because it has, he's great value. Before that, I was still drafting Jonathan Taylor. I had him on 13% of these slow puppy drafts that I've done, a healthy, maybe a little higher than it needed to be with Jonathan Taylor. But now, if I was doing drafts, I would definitely be drafting more of him. I was comfortable at 13%. I'd probably go up a little bit more. Now I got to make sure I don't draft too much Jonathan Taylor.
Well, I mean, sorry for speaking for you earlier then. We were on the opposite ends of the Jonathan Taylor spectrum. I've only taken him maybe 3 or 4 times in my best ball manias. I've jetted a little over 100. Now is my buying window, though. I'm certainly going to take some Taylors. I was kind of pumping the brakes because, I never look at, or I try to at least use situation as a final determining factor. And no one's arguing Jonathan Taylor's talent. He's in everyone's conversation of top 5. It's just the one situation that has some predictive nature is quarterback play. And, a rookie run-first quarterback doesn't necessarily bode fantastic for a guy like Taylor's ceiling. But it's still there technically. Like Daniel Jones with Saquon Barkley. Barkley still scored 270 fantasy points despite Jones's rushing. And Richardson might not necessarily run a lot more than Jones did last year. But mid-second round, for me, it was more so just like the other guys had more value. I wasn't comfortable taking Taylor ahead of Barkley, ahead of Chubb, ahead of Pollard. But now you don't have to. If he falls even slightly further, I saw him go at the 211 today. If I can get him in the early third round, or even if he slips to like the mid-third round, I mean, that's just a buy every time. Because like you said, Aaron, at a certain point, you just go for the talent and you don't worry about the situation. The way the CBA is, it's very unlikely any of these running backs actually hold out games. They lose a ton of money. And if he does get traded, which is a super long shot, that's probably better for his value. I mean, there's so many places where he goes and he's just right back into RB1 overall, almost for sure territory. So I think most people would agree. Not really a hot take by Jonathan Taylor, a very lukewarm take, but we can start getting spicier. So talking about the NFC West today, I figured we could start with a little more excitement. We'll start with the Seattle Seahawks and their newest soon-to-be star, JSN, first-round pick, first rookie off the board this year. And I'm just going to go out there and say that I still think, regardless of everything else we have with rookies, that JSN is going to be the best rookie pick off the board looking back. Maybe not necessarily because of his full season total, but it is going to be very quickly apparent how talented he is. He'll probably relegate aging Tyler Lockett to a degree, and Metcalf doesn't do everything. There's a huge chance that during the fantasy playoffs, JSN is top 5 wide receiver overall for the month of December. Aaron, are you in or out as a late 5th to early 6th round pick for JSN?
As the process has gone along, I have gone from, I don't want JSN. It seems that we're too high, where I'm leaving so much value. Of course, I'm not going to draft him, to progressively getting more and more at Jaxon, Smith-Njigba, because also it's trying to design these rosters that can compete at the beginning, but most importantly at the end. And I like that you mentioned, like with rookies in particular, if you take JSN, yes, it may be slow at the start of the season. You're just having to build a team that can compensate for that. And it's easy to do because the upside of JSN at the tail end of the season is great. Because one of the things that was brought to my attention recently on a podcast of the Late Round podcast with JJ Zacharyson is the Seattle Seahawks do have a really easy schedule for wide receivers. I want to say he said that it's the easiest schedule. So why can't JSN contend and compete, put up points? I know it's a 3 receiver set, and that's what scares people off, but embrace the uncertainty. Embrace that, hey, this 21-year-old receiver that was a first-round pick, that he can emerge late. We saw first-round receivers last season. Chris Olave and Garrett Wilson, his Ohio State guys, do fantastic in their rookie seasons. JSN certainly can too, because they competed on the same Ohio State teams, and JSN held his own very well, to say the least. And with Lockett, he might not even be the guy to fade. When I'm looking at my exposure rates, it's DK Metcalf. Metcalf's the guy you just don't want. Give me Jaxon Smith-Njigba, still give me Tyler Lockett. Obviously not on the same team, but this passing offense, it's going to be great. And this may be a little situational here, but like their top 2 running backs already dealing with some injuries, right? And look at just the roster moves in general. You don't take a receiver in the first round when you've already got 2 really good starters and decide to pass less. They're going to pass more. JSN can certainly compete. Just know it may be a slow start, but the reason I'm taking him is that upside for the second half of the season is exactly what I want in JSN.
Yeah, he's the type of guy in a basketball tournament that you just eat that 5th round cost, that 6th round cost, because there's a very high chance that you get those explosive weeks in the final couple of weeks of the season. The Seahawks are playing in environments that there could be shootouts, and they're certainly playing for the playoffs. Now, I think in week 17 they play the Steelers, which is a little upsetting, but we saw the Steelers defense fall apart last year. There's no reason that game can at least produce a multiple touchdown player. I think Metcalf's cost is certainly brings hesitancy, but he does slip sometimes. And for exposure's sake, you still have to take him here and there, understanding you're probably losing a little value. I do worry about Tyler Lockett. He goes one pick behind JSN. They've been kind of flip-flopping the last couple of weeks, but one nice highlight video comes out. Suddenly everyone's back in on JSN. Tyler Lockett's not young. He's a great player. I know it's blasphemy to say anything bad about Tyler Lockett because for the first time in his career, the fantasy industry seems to be unanimously in on this guy. But going to be 31 when the season starts. And there's a chance, he's been great, a wide receiver too, his whole career. But I'm here to win a best ball tournament. I'm not talking about, your casual league. I'm not talking about a sick value trade you got in Dynasty. I'm talking about $3 million in weeks 15, 16, and 17. And I would rather bet on Metcalf or JSN having those big weeks necessarily than Lockett just because of age. You never know. I mean, still draft Lockett, but definitely don't not draft JSN because there's people that will tell you just don't take him in the 5th round. I think you just got to take all 3 guys. One of them is going to be good. So that's kind of it. And that's all I have for JSN. Let's go to the Cardinals before we try to dive into the 49ers QB mess of a situation. Aaron, do you agree with me that Trey McBride is one of the best options as a late round tight end?
We'll get into Trey McBride, but before we do that, let's hear a message from the Podfather.
Let's take a moment to talk about Underdog Fantasy. Now, many of you have already signed up. Thousands have signed up from Player Profiler already over the years. Underdog has supported us since 2020. Much of what you see on Player Profiler is because of Underdog, because of their support. Get the Underdog app, plug in that promo code Underworld. I used to play Underdog just for the best ball drafts. I mean, the best ball drafts are amazing. These draft rooms fill so quickly, and you can win life-changing money. You want to take advantage of all the sleepers we talk about on this show? Well, what better place than in an Underdog draft room to do that? And I recommend taking your Underdog play to the next level by diving into their NFL pick'ems. It's important to correlate those NFL pick'ems. You can pick both the quarterbacks and the wide receivers to exceed expectations, correlate them, and you can 5x your payout. Bada bing, bada boom. Underdog Fantasy, the promo code is Underworld for an instant deposit match up to $100. Underdog is the truest friend of the Underworld.
Welcome back to Stat Masters. So, Chris, your question was, what do I think about Trey McBride as a late round tight end? He is one of my targets usually, especially if I've got like a 3 tight end build or if I got Kyler Murray. We're going to pull it up in real time here. Trey McBride, my exposure rate in these slow puppy drafts I've done, it's at 13%. And it will honestly probably go up to, I'm going to project it to be like 17%. I could see me taking him a couple more times. Still got some slow drafts going. And the reason I like him is like, we already know the profile. Profile's great. He was the top rookie tight end last year. And we saw at the tail end of the season, like, for the context, Zach Ertz got hurt. There was no more Ertz. Trey McBride steps in. And he becomes the guy at tight end. No like splitting snaps or anything, especially you see from weeks 15 through the rest of the season, those final 4 weeks. Look at the snap share. Snap shares about 85% or higher. There's even one where it's 96%. He's on the field the entire time. He's running the routes. When we've looked at tight ends that have top 12 seasons in PPR, and this thing still would qualify for half PPR. But really, the things that matter the most for tight ends, and it's simple, but one is snap share and one is target share. Just seeing that 4-game sample, yes, it's a small sample. The NFL season's already pretty short to begin with. Like, if we get that for an entire season, and we might. Zach Ertz tore his ACL and MCL, and the Cardinals, that's not going to be a contending team. Don't be surprised if Zach Ertz doesn't really do anything for this team. They're going to want to see what they have in Trey McBride. We have a 10-target game, and even some of the games that he didn't get a whole lot of targets, I was encouraged by his yards. And that's just as a rookie where a lot of times with tight ends, you're not going to see good performances. I was encouraged how that season ended. And Trey McBride, when you look at who's available in the 18th round, like he's almost always there. Sometimes it goes in the 17th round, but you're not going to find better options. You're not going to find guys that can actually help your best ball team. Just look at that Week 17 game. He put up 20 points. And when we had Billy on this show talking about tight ends, like, yeah, they don't really matter so much for the regular season part, but for tournaments, for the playoffs, you want to have those guys that have that type of upside. And the fact that he's still practically free, yeah, give me Trey McBride. Him and Kyler Murray is one of the stacks that I know is really common for my drafts.
Yeah, I mean that's pretty much the whole deal. He's a great tight end, but he's not new news anymore, so people have forgotten. He's the only player of any decent size on this roster. Even Hollywood Brown, their wide receiver one, is small. It just makes perfect sense. And Hayden Winks and Josh Norris on the Underdog show showed a couple weeks ago that tight ends year 2 and 3 are some of the more popular breakout years, where typically that's when you see a guy and kind of what he'll be for his career. McBride did it for half a season. At least it was really 8 weeks where he was at least on the field a lot. And now you just have a guy where when we're in garbage time of the season, like those last 4 games of the season, the Cardinals are the first team eliminated from playoffs, but Kyler's going to be out there healthy. They're just going to be slugging it around to their younger players, experimenting, seeing what they can build on for next year. If you don't think there's going to be a strong down the stretch push for, the young guys like McBride and Kyler, then, I don't know. I very much think that could happen, and he's free. So there's very little downside, especially in that range. In regards to little downside, I see very little downside also in taking Brock Purdy and even still taking a shot or two at Trey Lance because of very suppressed cost. Even now, as the prices start to separate, you see Purdy. Let's see, we'll pull it up on 4 for 4, how the prices have changed. Purdy's definitely been rising. He's up 4 spots in the last week, 168 overall. That's 15th round, right? And Lance kind of just fallen to the final round. I'm a Brock Purdy believer. I think there is no mystery. San Francisco has come out and every step of the way said Brock Purdy, Brock Purdy, Brock Purdy. Seems like he'll probably be healthy. And the weapons are really too good for him to fail at that price. Aaron, how are you breaking down this 49ers quarterback room?
I like what you mentioned about you do want to take stabs on both these guys. Like Trey Lance is now his ADP is almost past that fabled 215. Like he's just barely hanging on to being drafted, right? An 18th round, there really is no bad picks. If you take Trey Lance, you're taking a guy that's shown rushing upside. Could he be a bad NFL quarterback? Absolutely. Does it matter in fantasy? Absolutely not. So Trey Lance, 18th round, sure. Have some teams, not heavy exposure, but have some teams where if you need a third QB and you don't have any 14th, 15th round, just wait and take Trey Lance. The upside's still tantalizing. But Brock Purdy, I know I wasn't exactly a believer last season, but objectively, when he became the starting quarterback, there's this stretch, week 14 through the end of the regular season, week 18, where this is where he finished at quarterback in points per game. QB 8, QB 14, QB 13, QB 9, QB 5. 5 games there, he gave you 3 top 10 performances, and his worst performance put him at about a mid QB 2. That's not bad because Purdy, even with his cost going up, he's still really cheap in drafts. And if you do happen to take a Deebo Samuel, a Brandon Ayuk, and you're wanting to have just that stack, these are the favorite stacks that I have in best ball is I don't like the expensive ones. I don't want to take a Josh Allen, Stephon Diggs. I like to kind of get my cheaper stacks, just take best players and then kind of build my stacks maybe in the back half of the draft there. And this is a perfect one. If you take Deebo and you're like, hey, could I maximize my upside by stacking? Sure, take Brock Purdy. I've definitely been drafting more Brock Purdy. And honestly, I've probably been too late on it. It's the lesson learned with injuries is embrace some uncertainty there. I know at the start of the offseason, it made it seem like he wouldn't play for a long time. And then lo and behold, today it's, he's the best quarterback for the 49ers. He's the guy. And now his price, I just looked at the ADP rising from last month and it's up 8 spots. It's almost up a full round. Like we're late on that, but still, even with the price increasing, take Brock Purdy. And those unique teams where maybe it's a 3 quarterback build and you're needing that cheap QB3, you can wait till the 18th round, take Trey Lance. They still have the sunk cost of a first round pick in Trey Lance. They can't trade him until they really show what he can do. There is certainly a world where Trey Lance gets on the field this season. I don't know how, but I'm willing to bet money it's going to happen. And that's a steal of an 18th round pick in Trey Lance.
Yeah. There's a very slim world where Sam Darnold is the backup over Lance. I'm really not buying it. It's probably the Jets fan in me. It's also one of those circumstances, you pointed this out before, Aaron, where you just look at the group ADPs for this team. And it's like, how are you going to have the RB1, 2 top 30 receivers, a top 5 tight end? Even the RB2 flirts with the first 10 rounds. But then the quarterbacks are just an afterthought because of uncertainty. Draft 2 of them. Who cares? If you take Justin Herbert in the 5th round and you load up your team, you're going to burn 3 or 4 roster spots on every team anyway. 3 to 5 of all of your teams are going to, all your teams are going to feature at least 3 to 5 players that are outright zeros. It's guaranteed. So at least your 0 gives you a quarterback hedge. Take Purdy and Lance. If you're a Darnold guy, I'm not. If you are, take Purdy and Darnold. And then if Purdy does miss time or have a repeat injury or this or that, again, you're hedging very little, or just take different guys in different drafts. But people who are nervous and aren't taking any stabs, you got to be taking stabs, and you still have time. Now, if Brock Purdy really starts to gain steam and that ADP does end up near like a Geno Smith, then you've probably jumped the shark, but you still have time. He was cheaper. He was going like the 17th round. If you want to look on 4for4 at a longer period of time, he went down more than he went up. But I think you still have time. I wouldn't be scared, especially with all the upside. The final team is the Rams. A lot going on with the Rams today. I'm not going to necessarily talk about Cooper Kupp, who now is dealing with a hamstring injury. We've talked a lot about the Rams on this show. I've been very skeptical of Stafford, Kupp, and Akers because of the injuries that they're walking in with. But if you're going to be skeptical of the starters, someone has to get the ball. They're a professional offense. They're not going to do nothing, right? So is Van Jefferson a worthwhile value in drafts? Aaron, are you getting in the van?
Lately, I have been, but, I don't know if I'd say that I've been getting in on the van. It's just been more of a lot of those players going around him. As I've been drafting, I'm going, my exposure is pretty high on this player, pretty high on this player, and I need to pivot. And I have finally started to pivot to Van Jefferson. Full transparency, my exposure is 5% right now. But there can be a case, right? Like this past season, things happen, and I know we can't just give mulligans to every single player, but Jefferson entered the season injured, and it took him a while, and there's a reason he had a disappointing year. He ended the 2021 season with a lot of hype, especially because the Rams won the Super Bowl that season. Came out flat in 2022. But in 2021, when we do look at that season where I don't want to say he broke out, but he at least kind of asserted himself as being a guy that can be fantasy relevant, there were some stats that looked decent, starting with just best ball points added. This is a best ball podcast. We do have to look at it. His top 50 in best ball points added when he played a full season. And he had 89 targets. And I want to say that there was Robert Woods / Odell Beckham. That was the number 2 target. Cooper Kupp obviously being number 1. Van Jefferson right now, I would say, is the de facto number 2 receiver there. He gets maybe a bump in targets. I think that he could definitely finish top 40 best ball points added if he stays healthy, knock on wood. We love the yards per reception. Like he's not just catching short passes falling down. Yards per reception was 16 yards in 2021. That was number 7. And even this past season, where it was an injury-shortened season to begin, he averaged 15.4 yards per receptions. He's making big plays. And yes, this Rams offense isn't as exciting as it was 2 years ago. I get that. But the Rams defense is also horrible. Like, they're going to be playing behind. Right? They're going to have to pass. And this was a team that already wanted to pass. Van Jefferson's at least going to get opportunities. And his current ADP he's going as wide receiver 63. His ADP is 140. Like, that's an acceptable cost. Like that's a fair price. He's going right above the Carolina receiver duo of Jonathan Mingo, Adam Thielen, like right above KJ Osborne. When you start looking at the names of just the guys at his own position, you go, something's not right. Even the guys ahead, like Michael Gallup's going ahead of him. We've talked plenty about Gallup, but Jefferson has opportunity. That's the key thing. He has opportunity to command a decent target share in an offense. And that's when we won't even talk about Cooper Kupp's injury. He probably plays, but Kupp's not going to catch everything. Kupp's not going to get all the targets. Someone else is. And if it's not Higbee, then it's going to be Van Jefferson. I'm on board with Van Jefferson. I'm starting to draft him more.
Yeah, I mean, it's all fair. I mean, they did add DeMarcus Robinson, and Ben Skowronek is good for 40, 50 targets. They have Higbee. So there's not necessarily no one, but I think everything you said is fair and correct. There is opportunity. I think the cost among receivers is fair. You know, he's around a lot of receivers with a comparable level of skill. Your Donovan Peoples-Jones, your DJ Charks, right? Your Alec Pierces, your KJ Osbornes, your Romeo Doubses. But he is also just one of those guys. So you can't really expect him to be any higher than like a wide receiver 40 at best. Probably finishes somewhere closer to that second year, like wide receiver 45, wide receiver 50. You can make do with that on your best ball team at that cost, 5 to 8% total. Jefferson takes some shots here and there, but really I'm mostly only targeting him. I'm not planning on having this guy like win my fantasy league, but he is good for a week 17 stack in a game versus the Giants. That could be one of those, week 17 kind of garbage games where two bad teams just score a ton of points, and fantasy football doesn't care how good your team is. All points are points. I will say with Van, he's actually slipped a little bit in the last week. I think I have this set at 2 weeks in ADP. So it's not like he's overhyped. As long as you're not taking him before like Rashee Rice, who's on Kansas City, much better team. And if you really believe in one of these other guys, like a Jonathan Mingo, I wouldn't let Van Jefferson hold you back, but he certainly deserves to be drafted.
Thanks for joining us on Stat Masters, your go-to for fantasy football insights. From player analysis to breakdowns, we've empowered you to dominate your leagues. Stay subscribed for cutting-edge analysis to keep you ahead of the competition. Keep the conversation going, stay passionate, focused, and victorious. This is Stat Masters signing off.
Hey, you like that video? Be sure to subscribe and activate those alerts so you get notified as soon as new videos drop. And be sure to check out playerprofiler.com. We have all the tools for you to dominate every type of fantasy league. We have a draft kit, Dynasty Deluxe, data analysis, DFS Dominator, and don't forget the player rankings to rule them all.